What's going on, everybody, and welcome to day one of the NCAA's annual Diversity and Inclusion social media campaign. So today we're actually going to be talking about My Voice, My Platform, and I have two really special individuals from the NYU community, and I'm really excited to talk with them about it. So first, I really want to introduce Devin Robin. He is the Assistant Athletic Director for Intramurals, Club Sports, and Recreation. In addition to that, we also have Janine Cuffey. She is an NYU alumna. She was a absolute standout star on the women's basketball team. She's done a lot with Black BLAC. That's an organization that we'll talk about potentially a little bit later on. And she also graduated from the Steinhardt School in particular. So really just to give you guys some background before we go ahead and dive into this, what's sure to be a really good conversation, sharing a bunch of stories centered around many different things. I just want to explain what it is that we're going to be getting into. So we're really just going to talk about identities, perspectives, and experiences. The goal of the campaign, it's to use social media to create dialogue around diversity and inclusion so that communicate how inclusive environments enhance the student athlete experience. So I am going to be moderating today. My name is Kyle Junkina. I am the new media manager. And again, just very fortunate to be spending the time with you both. Let's go ahead and just dive right into the conversation. Let's talk about identity. So as somebody that's born and raised in New York, I know that we have that in common. You know, New York City is a place with just extreme, of course, racial diversity, right? It's also well known as a melting pot in terms of the different identities that you expose yourself to. So talk about a time in athletics where you were exposed particularly to a diversity of thought.
I would say a diversity of thought specifically for me, having grown up in New York and been surrounded by all the communities you were highlighting, would specifically be the underrepresentation of the LGBTQ plus community within NYU athletics. Playing basketball and just generally being in sports, I was continuously surrounded by people that identified within the LGBTQ plus community. So when I transitioned to NYU, I kind of just continued living life, like not thinking about that representation. And it was up until my senior year where there was only one or two people on my team that were actively out within the LGBTQ plus community. And for me specifically, being in basketball, that felt kind of crazy. So having that conversation, or people that identify that type of way, and seeing how underrepresented they felt within NYU athletics was very eye-opening to me, because we're in New York City. We're at a giant university smack in East Village, Washington Square Park. Like, that is what that area is known for, like Stonewall. Like, these are where the riots were occurring. So for me to find out that there were groups and that population within NYU specifically felt, and specifically NYU athletics, felt so underrepresented and undersupported was really eye-opening for me. So my senior year, I tried to work a little bit on finding a community and space for that. But that was very eye-opening because I, as a minority in general within athletics, felt underrepresented. So it was interesting to see another population that I thought would be more open, more just alive in the athletics communities, be super underrepresented and not have any connection within the athletic community.
For me, it was a little different. I went to a small school, as Kyle knows, Casanova, New York, shout out. And at the time, it was a predominantly white institution. It was a PWI. I mean, I would say over the last couple of years, they've made some inroads and diversified and embedded a lot of those DEI qualities into how they accept students. But for me, in sport, I played baseball. So for me, as a New York City kid, going upstate New York, central New York, for me, I think it illuminated how my presence is seen in other spaces. I think that was the biggest thing for me. Being a New York City kid, you're around 8 million people who may be different. And then once you step out, you're like, whoa, this is how the rest of the world really is. You could be insulated in New York City. And that's one of the things I quickly learned. For me, I played a predominantly white sport at this time. At the time, it was baseball. And there's nothing like looking down the bench and seeing no one that looks like you. So for me, it inspired me in the position I am in now, because one of the things I love about what I do is giving access to all different types of people, giving access and that foundation in sport that a lot of times we tend to think is just competitive, and it is, but we don't really look at the inroads to those spaces. Everyone comes into college with a different foundation, a different high school access, and yes, they're talented, but they've all gotten there so differently, with so many different privileges and accessibilities. So just through sport, I think sport's always been that model that, yes, it's a meritocracy. It's this belief that you are built on your ability, but even in sport, you realize there's so many inequalities and so many underrepresented individuals through those spaces. So it inspired me to do what I do today and give access to people who haven't had access, who haven't had the ability to, like to say, bounce a ball and just kind of really seek that. So it's been my experience through that, my undergrad.
As you both each referred to that exposure that you had to a diversity of thought, I was curious, a question that popped up for me, how did it help to shape your identity? And then further, you each have both respectively like just amazing platforms. Janine, you're fresh out of school, but you've created something that's far, far bigger. And I hope you do go on to speak about that. Devin, you're in a leadership role right now where you are in a spot where you can do some pretty special things. So when we talk about how you've been exposed to different things and how that helps to shape your identity, I'd like for you guys to kind of explore the question, how has that helped to establish and grow your platform?
Yeah, so just to circle back to what Devin had already mentioned about looking down the bench and not seeing people that looked like you. For me, my experience at NYU was kind of crazy. Obviously, Devin, you were upstate New York, predominantly white sport. So for you, it was an understandable experience, regardless of how that experience went. It was kind of a stereotype. Versus being in New York City at a giant university, you expect to look down the bench and see some diversity. And I think the biggest thing that hit me was my sophomore year when I was the only Black/Latino person of color on the team. That being said, there were only two other people of color, those both being from the Asian community. And so for that really that highlighted my experience and my perspective. And linking back to what I mentioned with my diversity of thought, I was young, still going through a whole lot sophomore year, trying to just make my bread, get my points. But when it hit senior year and we had COVID and I had all this time, it really just allowed me to start thinking about what I could do for NYU as a community and how I could impact it. And I've continued that same thought process as I've started my first career as teaching. And I think it's just really targeting those groups that are underrepresented. And I think a lot of people don't understand the impact of just having one person looking like you can make. My freshman year and my junior year, I had one or two other Black people on the team. And that was really impactful for my experience. And my senior year, being a leader on a team where we were all on Zoom in the middle of a Black Lives Matter essentially crisis that was going on, it was very prevalent to what was going on and how unaware or ignorant really that people were on this matter. And it was just very eye-opening to see how people could move on and not understand the impact that it has on somebody in that type of event. So for me, how it's shaped my perspective and how I move through life, it's just trying to be that one person that acknowledges or tries to connect and provide a space for people that are unseen, because just having one person can make the world of a difference.
That was really well said. For me, it kind of echoes in the same way. For me, it was it kind of goes back to the thought, right? And in navigating these spaces that you're in your formative years and you're trying to figure out who you are at the same time. And as I always say, this is how the world sees you. The world sees you in a light before you even figure out who you are. For me, I always go back to, some context of who I am. It's more, so I'm multiracial. My father was biracial. My grandparents are Portuguese, British, Indian, and they all came from the Caribbean. So there's a whole bunch of world history there, colonialism, all sorts of stuff that's wrapped into that. And for me, growing up in New York City, it's always been, you hang out with a certain group and they see you in a certain way. But like I said, when you go upstate, into certain white spaces, you're just, you're just another person that's not white. When you're trying to navigate all these different identities, all these different cultures, things like that, and trying to figure it out for yourself before you really can explore the world, if I'm articulating that correctly. So for me, that's how that played into me for a lot during my playing experience. Going back to that analogy of looking down the bench, it was like, hey, here's this, biracial kid on a team with a whole bunch of white kids, but they didn't see me as biracial or having any type of background. I was just, hey, he's not white, he must be black kind of deal. And then obviously if I go into other spaces, it's like, hey, what are you? That's that question that most, people who battle or have multiple identities kind of deal with. So I think one of the things it kind of did for me is strengthen myself and who I am and being affirmative and just accepting that, and that can be a struggle even through college, and even into spaces now as a professional. People see you before you have a chance to really give them who you are. So yeah, it's kind of developed into that kind of feel for myself of being okay with it, accepting it, and how I can be an example for other students or people really who are navigating waters where it gets messy, right? Like we're not one thing. We're complex individuals who carry lineages that has very, very horrific and detailed history that we sometimes don't want to talk about. And we just kind of broad stroke it with black, white, you're this, you're that, and people compartmentalize people into these boxes when really we just need to unpack ourselves and be okay with that. And sometimes we don't want to explore that. So the other part to this too is that I will wrap it in. Sometimes we think about race too much. I'm a first generation student, right? So now you're all the stereotypes. You're the, the person of color who's going to college for the first time, who plays athletics. And I don't even have to say anymore. And you guys already know, well, that's probably the reason he went to college, right? So you always have to battle that and also prove yourself that you're more than just an athlete. You're more than just that. You're more than just someone who bounces the ball on the court, who can throw a ball. You're also a mind who got here on his own. So I've always carried that chip as a first generation student. I still do. And it's built in because, you're always relying on yourself and being okay with identity. And I think that is something I still carry today when we have these discussions, or I try to help students with their discussions or discoveries as well.
I think that's something for me as somebody that also went to a predominantly white institution, Wheaton College, very small school in Massachusetts, less than 2,000 of us. I'd walk into a lot of classrooms and I'd find myself, Jenny, I don't know if you did the same ever, but I'd find myself in my later years thinking, how many other people of color are in this classroom right now? And not only that, but people would learn about the scholarship that I had and they'd be like, oh, so that's like affirmative action. And I'm like, not quite. And so, I think that it's exactly what Devin said. It kind of gives you that chip on your shoulder because I too am first generation, and it kind of, just like you said there, Devin, like if you're betting on yourself, like you're going to double down. And so I want to segue over a little bit into experience, because now we're starting to delve a little bit into those experiences. Like I was just sharing a couple anecdotes myself. Sport can be a metaphor for life. I'm a very, very firm believer in that. And a lot of times the lessons that we learn in competition, as all student athletes here, they're directly transferable to the ones that you can apply to your work or your life just overall. So Devin, I'm going to have you lead off on this question about experience. Speak on an experience you had in sport where you were able to take a lesson that you learned and apply that to the point of life that you're in now.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson for me, so like I play baseball and I was not nearly the athlete that Janine is or was. I mean, she was fantastic. I've seen her play, not even on that level, right? Like I was long man relief. If we're getting blown out, I'm coming in, I'm eating up innings. That was me, right? So, but at the same time, it spoke to, there's a role, right? And I think there's a role in understanding what you bring to the table. And I think a lot of times sports teaches you that I think we always believe that everyone has to be the superstar. Everyone has to, it's either this or you're not. I was a pitcher, learned how to pitch. I was actually moved into the pitching role in college, right? Didn't know what I was doing, but I also didn't have access to pitching coaches on my way home. I'm going home and I'm working, 4 hours in the farm in the Caribbean, and then, trying to make money to stay in school. So it goes back to my belief in access in sport. It's just having foundational inroads for people. At the same time, it's okay to be, the long man. It's okay to be the tall person. But I think what often goes missing, especially in today's culture, is the attitude you bring, and that camaraderie. And I think it speaks to Janine when she says she looks down the bench and there's no one there. It's all about representation, and how you kind of the equity that we build into these sports and not just sports, but recreation, how we build it into fitness, how we allow people to express themselves in these platforms, but also give them the tools that are lifelong measures. And I think that's one of the things that taught me being the long man. That's my role. I'm going to come in, I'm going to mop up, take pride in it, do it to the best of your ability. But that is what you are at that moment. But at the same time, you can aspire to be much more. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes we put people in these boxes that don't allow them to kind of grow beyond what they should be. So it's more, if I can articulate correctly, it's just more knowing who you are, but also understanding what you're capable of. And this is more from a coaching level too. And not looking at one student and saying, okay, great, that's where they are, that's where they'll always be, and understanding that there is potential, not necessarily a lack of ability. Sometimes it's just access to what can get a student to another level, whether that be physically or sometimes just mentally, because sports is a competitive environment, and sometimes it's just not, the physical aspect that we rely on. So going back to my long reliever, it's a mental thing, and understanding and being firm in who you are and understanding identities and being confident, because if you're not confident in yourself, I don't think how else would you understand to move forward and be confident in this world of complex issues. So
different perspective coming from a student athlete. I will highlight specifically like NYU experiences rather than me right now. And I would say my like quote or anecdote from sports is just the importance of teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work, whatever, all that. But just like I've always been kind of an individualist, like coming from the background I did, it's always like grind and you'll get what you've earned, basically. And I would say even now I still slightly have that mindset, but sports is really drilled in my head that it's okay to need help and it's all right to need other people. And that's the point of teamwork. It's not you're doing it alone. It's all these minds together can really make something successful. And I think that really came to fruition my senior year with Black, like you've already mentioned, Kyle. If I could have done it alone, I probably would have done it before my senior year, but it took me having the experience at NYU and the connections that I did in order to make it happen. Just to plug a few names, I had Riley Dimps on the men's basketball team. He's a senior now. I had Stuart, who just came in and was with the idea from the jump when I first mentioned it to him. And I had my coach, Coach Barber, pushing me continuously to get to it, saying like she knew it was really important. And I think just having that support group, obviously, if it was just me, I could have just put my head into my studies and just been like, this is my senior year, it's COVID, I'm just going to go through and get it done and graduate. But having like that accountability and the support of a team, knowing that I was capable of spearheading this and making it happen, not only made me feel capable, but also allowed me to make a lasting change at NYU, because I already know Riley is still keeping up with it. And there's going to be a meeting coming soon, I believe, in the next few weeks. And to me, that's just awesome that it was like this group that was the hopes of let's see who we can get and send out a Google survey is going to outlast me. It's going to outlast Riley. and ideally last as a group forever at NYU, because it is so important to make those athletes feel seen. We've already highlighted how there is little diversity, unfortunately, specifically on the basketball team, but having made Black, I had about 50 students, and I'll say maybe there were 80 people of color. That's including Black and Latinx students out of a population of 500 at NYU, specifically within athletes. So that was very clear to me how little the numbers were, regardless of what it looked like on paper. And so the importance of Black is just insane, regardless of the DEI movements we have and how we will see diversity continue to thrive at NYU in the coming years. 50 or so out of 500 is not a good number. So this group is going to be important for many years to come, because it's not going to change overnight, regardless of if recruitment is targeted at it. It's still getting those people to feel comfortable to come. And I think I've talked with Nikki Webb about it, Black specifically, being a recruitment tool almost, because people will know there's a space, regardless of whether it's super highlighted on your team's roster, that there is a space for this community, and we are working to make everyone feel supported. And so I felt that boost through teamwork, but that teamwork makes the dream work will affect all the students coming, that feel, despite who they see on the court or on the field every day, that they have a team within NYU athletics that is rooting for them and supporting them every day in their mission, regardless whether they decide to stay within athletics or not, because that's a lot of people drop after freshman, sophomore year. Just providing that space to make people feel like there is a team and a lot of support.
Janine, you brought up about how Stewart immediately had that buy-in, and it's something that we as a smaller group here talk about really on a weekly basis. We really want to explore, okay, like we know that there's some lacking diversity in the athletics department from the student athlete standpoint, and we were very curious, and this is something that we're going to continue to explore. What are the systems in place for recruiting? What neighborhoods are we recruiting in? And it's not enough to just get these individuals in the room, but what is their retention rate? What are we doing for them once they actually get here? Because you could be an amazing student of color that absolutely thrives in competition, but if you ain't feel welcome here, if it ain't it, it ain't it, right? And so we want to explore what it is that we're doing, not only to get them here, but to keep them here, that inclusive environment. And so I really want to wrap on this final question, and we will keep it with you, Janine. I do believe that our experiences give us perspective. And so giving some thought to some actionable steps, you've already began to do that, or rather you've already done that, and it continues to be lived on through here because your legacy has already begun to grow at such a rapid pace. What are some things we can do, topics we can discuss, events we can hold to continue to open up these perspectives, working backwards here, like in order to broaden our experiences to thus help find our identity. So what are some actionable steps that we could begin to implement here on our side? Because here, I do believe that student athletes are very gifted individuals, but sometimes they can only go as far as the staff is willing to help lead. And so with that said, what is your input on that?
I've thought about this previously when I was in the formation of getting Black to get started. And I think there's multiple action steps. And I think the problem is, like you highlighted, like we can only go as far as administration's willing to go. But I think on top of that, it's really emphasizing the importance of the students that are not of color within the athletic community. I think we do not highlight enough the importance of their role in supporting these students when we are at NYU. Like I'll plug NYU Women's Hoops. Like we tried to do a fantastic job. I worked with our coach a lot, trying to get a lot of diversity and awareness events going within specifically our team during the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was honestly just sad to see the level of engagement from students that were not people of color. And it just got honestly exhausting for me and the few students of color continuously trying to chime in and get people to understand what was going on. And it's not on the students that are in the minority to be doing the heavy lifting. So I think it's starting from the jump preseason, regular season, we're starting in the fall, having events that are centered not only around making Black students feel welcome, but having the white and other majority students understand the impact of their actions on the POCs in the athletic department. So that comes from having organized but engaging events from the jump about certain events, whether that's LGBTQ plus driven events, Black and Latinx events, Asian hate events. Like, all these things are really important, but if they're not driven to a student mind and not targeted towards the majority population in a sense, it's not going to be effective, because the people that are being harmed by these events and harmed by the lack of diversity already know the experience. So there is no need to keep preaching events like, hey, like, this will make me feel welcome. I know it will make me feel welcome. We need to make sure that the people that are in positions to make us feel unwelcome are aware of what they need to do. So for me, I think Black is a fantastic idea and group that's going to make the students that are already there feeling alienated feel supported, but we need to target specifically more the groups that are not feeling that way, so that they are aware of what can be done and how we can support the minority groups on campus.
I think Janine said it so well. It shouldn't be on a lot of the people of color or the minority groups to kind of shoulder or bear that brunt. I think a lot of this has to come from, the people who aren't marginalized in these spaces, or who aren't, receiving the microaggressions in these spaces, or aren't being squeezed in these spaces, because essentially, a lot of that has to come from those who are dictating the spaces. How do those spaces change? And those change with power, right? So I think a lot of it has to come from an internal audit. Just, what do we want? And I know that sounds very broad and very basic, but we can't say we want diversity and then have action that doesn't move toward that. So it's got to be a real conversation. It's got to be almost like what I said, Kyle, in that meeting, that it has to be vulnerable. We have to be able to open up and understand that these are conversations that are going to hurt. They're going to have to, self-reflective. At the same time, there's going to have to be change made in a lot of spots, in how we do things, how we operate, how we treat one another. I think that's a big one that we just don't understand. Like, it's just as simple as seeing someone, right? Like, it's just acknowledging their existence. And I don't mean that in a physical manner, but just acknowledging who they are, their background, where they're from, how they celebrate, how they speak, and not looking at it as some type of outlier or not normal or not fit for this university. So I think those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves as a department in a realistic way. I'm looking at programs, right? Little things like, are we meeting, sports or fitness or culturally appropriated, not appropriated, but culturally programs that are meant, like badminton. It was like little things like that that may not fit the American outlook, but it's okay to look at other cultures and accept those and kind of include those. I know that's just a buzzword, but not leaving anything on the table, because I think the space we're in right now, and I think Janine used the word very clearly, and I thought it was last year was a crisis. I think everyone woke up and it, not in a way where it's not in a way where everyone woke up, but I think there was a certain majority that woke up, and there was someone who were just saying, yeah, we've been telling you this for a while. And I think we need to meet now. I think the next steps is what needs to happen, because I think a lot of times we have these conversations, and that's what happens. We have these conversations, and what needs to happen is we need to figure out what we want, how we want to do it, and act on it. And it's talk at some point, talk is cheap, right? And I think a lot of it, what Janine says about recruiting, where you're coming from, where are we going to see these students, how are we getting these students in? Kyle, you mentioned, how are we keeping these students? And not only how are we keeping them, but are they progressing through our programs that socially mobilize them in a way that they're prepared for the world in a better way, coming through our doors, not leaving still like, okay, I looked down the bench and there was no one there to support me. Those shouldn't be end goals or, finalized experiences through our spaces, through our programs. That shouldn't happen. So we need to take a hard look at ourselves, and then after that, take action. And I think the question, not to harp on it, but the question needs to be, what do we want to be?
You highlighted vulnerability and how that needs to be had in the conversations. And I think on top of that, really important is accountability. Like, I feel like we so often ask the student athletes, how are you feeling? What can we do? But we're not holding the people in power accountable. Like, I've had microaggressions occur at NYU from training staff, from other coaches, and we're not holding them accountable because they're in positions of power. Oh, if I talk, I'm not going to play. If I fight back, I'm not going to play. And in college, all you want to do is play. You're not there to practice. That's not what you spent your entire childhood working up towards. And I think it's really important that we highlight that. And we're not saying, oh, we need to fire people that are doing these microaggressions. It's about teaching. It's not just the students. It's that we need to hold the entire administration, the entire NYU athletics department accountable for learning your mistakes. Oh, I made a microaggression. How can I not have that happen again? Because if it goes unchecked by students who are, yes, we're grown, but we're between 18, 22, 23 years old, and we're interacting with people that are 30 to 60. So there's a level of fear almost in our accountability. So we're not checking it. So we need to have people that we're comfortable going to in order to check that behavior. And I want to give big ups to Stuart because I've had conversations with him about it. And he's like, if something happens, you come to me and I will handle it. And we need more people like that because Stuart isn't accessible to everyone. He would love to be, but not everyone's going to feel comfortable going and talking to the athletic director of the entire department. So I think it's just really important to have staff like Devin, who I now know I can plug to other students on campus, like you, Kyle. I can see that you're an ally. Like, having those people actively out and about so that the students there know who they can trust, I think is really important. And that's going to come with representation of, if I see Devin on campus, I know that he's a minority. I know that I potentially feel more comfortable talking to him than maybe a white staff member. And whether that's me being biased or not, that's just kind of how it goes when you see the lack of diversity at NYU athletics. And I think just making, one, the staff that are making people uncomfortable accountable happen, and two, just creating a safe space out within the adult community at NYU athletics, within the department, very well known and seen, so athletes know who they can trust and talk to about it. Because sometimes you think I'm overreacting, like you'll be like, oh, was that really a big deal? Was I reading into that? You get another perspective and you're like, okay, I wasn't reading into it. That needs to go checked. And I think that is just very much missing. And I'm hoping within the next few years, DEI has become really big in the last year and a half, that is something that continues to progress.
I think, yeah, you're 100% right. And I think part of it too, that we, even on the educational side, is understanding that your college experience should be about learning about one another. It should not be a continuation of what is the norm, right? And this goes to white students as well. And I've said this to students in our office as well, is the onus is on you as well to learn. It is not something that, like, great, I'm going to learn about something in February. I'm just going to use that as an example, right? As the height of my exploration beyond my culture. It should be an ongoing thing. And it should also be something that you, as the majority, kind of put yourself out there to want to learn, to understand, to also open up those spaces, to have that dialogue. Again, I think it comes back to what Janine's saying. It should not be something that is also always relied on by the minority or, people of color to kind of make this uproar and this push. Because if we learn about one another, even on this, this Zoom, I've learned much about the two of you. I think I'm a better person for that. And I think that's the same space we need to create, because that's what college is about. I mean, that's the education that's outside of the classroom that needs to happen. And if you're just learning one mode, almost college, like you said, you went to PWI, and you talk about professors who always look the same. You start to wonder towards your senior year, like, am I getting the full story? And whatever subject is, am I getting the full lens on this? And I think that's something that needs to happen, is that no matter, even if you're an ally, I think especially if you are a person who is white and you are an ally, I think you need to be an ally. I think it can't just be something that's silent and you put a sticker on your door or something like that. It has to be active. It has to be reactive. It has to be proactive. So I think that goes to the piece as well. I mean, everyone has a part in this. It's not just something that, events or, fancy months or labels or things like this. This is an ongoing thing that needs to be pitched in by everyone to fix it because we all had a part in it. Not necessarily all of us, but we all need to get together and fix it.
Janine, earlier you mentioned that it's not on minorities to do the heavy lifting, and Devin, you put it perfectly just now. College should be about learning about each other, and I think that's what I've appreciated so much about this space, like continuing to be in these realms, to have conversations like this with people like y'all. Before we split, I wanted to at least open the floor up. You might use it, you might not, in terms of any key takeaways that you'd like to provide, as far as pieces that you wanted to put out there that maybe you didn't get to, provide after, a certain question. Maybe you had like a certain thought come to mind, but you didn't want to like shoehorn it in. This is that space for it. So however you guys would like to take it, it's all yours.
I just want to quickly revoice what Devin just mentioned, just in a different light, because I do not have the correct verbiage directly. But one, speak up for yourselves. Obviously, I've already mentioned that it's not on the minorities to continuously be the only one fighting, but don't feel afraid to stick up for yourself. It is hard in a space where you are the minority, but it needs to happen. And as a result, of groups like Black and other things will continue to flourish. And on the other side, like Devin said, being an ally is not being silent. So speak up for your friends, speak up for who you care about, and speak up for matters that are important to you. Because staying silent and saying, I got you, oh, like I'm going to check in with you after an event occurs, is allowing the person that may have harmed your best friend, harmed your teammate, continue to go on and be unchecked. So just for me, speak up for yourself, speak up for everyone else, and talk about the matters you care about.
That was great. Yeah, I think I would go back to just having confidence, and it's really just tied to what Janine said. I think, and just to full transparency and me being vulnerable, I can tell you so many times where I myself was silent, or we talk about code switching, things like that. That I didn't want to be the angry Black kid, right? Or you didn't want to be the person that's ungrateful because you should be lucky you're here kind of deal, or things like that. And I think back on those times where I complied. I complied because I didn't know how to respond in the moment, because I thought me defending myself would just kind of give power to that credence, when really I've learned over the years, and even now as an administrator and kind of imparting this to students, is that being confident in yourself, it's okay, because stereotypes are what you feed it and how you feed it. So I would say definitely being confident, and a lot what Janine said is speaking up. There's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing that makes you lesser in that moment, or it is nothing that helps you feed into stereotypes or different things like that. I think a lot of it is just doing what's right and speaking up for yourself, and also as an ally, speaking up for those in those spaces. And the key thing is in those moments, right? When you see it happen, you react. Hey, that's not right. Hey, don't say that. Hey, a better way to say that is this. Because I think a lot of us in those moments kind of have those deer in the headlights kind of feel like, I know that was wrong, but almost to Janine, there's a power structure in every single communicative moment, right? The assistant AD is there, this person's there. Should I say something? Maybe I'll pull it back and I'll address it later. I think having the confidence to really do it. And I think we're in a time where that is more socially acceptable than it used to be. It's not where we need it to be, but I think we're getting there. So I would say the more people who speak out, the more people who are corrective. And it's all about calling people in, not necessarily calling them out, calling them in and educating them on why the situation is wrong and on why whatever they use was incorrect, or how they should treat one another, and having grace for one another. A lot of it just comes down to empathy and just having grace for your fellow person. So yeah, I think that's what I would say to anyone, especially that that freshman or that sophomore who's here. Be confident. Don't shy away from the moment, and then be confident in who you are and what you bring to the table, because you might change a situation that may change someone's outlook, and that's what we need more of.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And I just feel like it's thoughtful discourse like this that not only keep me going, it'll keep each of you going. It'll also just help push our communities and really our mission overall forward. So again, I just want to thank y'all both so much, not only for just taking the time to talk about this, but even just giving us actionable items in order to actually, continue to move in the direction that we want to. This was just day one of the NCAA Diversity and Inclusion annual social media campaign. We have a lot more really good content coming up. Again, just keep it locked here at NYU Athletics. And again, Janine, Devin, want to thank you all very much.